Prince Harry and Meghan Markle's legal team have been in contact with the Daily Mail after it republished allegations made in Andrew Lowney's new book entitled
A quiet signature on a custody agreement should have ended the tension. Instead, it ignited something far bigger. Within hours of the deal being signed, Prince Harry reportedly made accusations that stunned even seasoned royal observers, drawing Meghan and Prince Andrew into a storm no one anticipated. What was meant to bring stability now fuels outrage, suspicion, and relentless headlines across the globe. Insiders speak of fractured trust and irreversible consequences. What compelled Harry to speak out now, and how deep does this conflict truly run? The moment the ink dried. February 11, 2026, less than 24 hours after the final royal conclave, the atmosphere inside Windsor Castle was heavy with consequence. Behind closed doors, under the authority of the reactivated Windsor Custodial Framework, an emergency joint custody stabilization agreement was placed on a polished oak table inside a guarded chamber. There were no cameras, no public statements, just signatures that would quietly alter the course of royal history. Princess Anne, acting as head of custodial oversight, signed first. Her expression revealed nothing, her pen steady, deliberate. Beside her sat Prince William, exercising temporary sovereign authority granted in December by King Charles. He reviewed each page carefully before adding his name in measured strokes. Across the table, Prince Harry, no longer defiant, no longer distant, signed under the structured guardianship clause as the children's biological father. Duchess Sophie of Edinburgh followed, formally accepting her role as neutral royal guardian. Meghan Markle was not present. Her legal representation from California appeared on her behalf through coordinated counsel. The absence was noted, but it did not slow the process. The agreement itself was precise and uncompromising. Custody would now fall under Crown-supervised guardianship. Meghan's independent authority to relocate Archie and Lilibet across jurisdictions was formally suspended. Educational transition plans toward the Grey House program within Windsor's protected estate were initiated. Psychological evaluations and monitored welfare reviews would continue under the oversight of Royal Pediatric Trust specialists. Every clause reflected the urgency that had built since late January, since the petitions, the leaked manifests, the school withdrawal letters, and the diplomatic notifications to U.S. authorities. When the final page was signed, the room did not erupt in relief. There was no sense of victory, only a quiet acknowledgement that a line had been drawn. Folders were gathered, advisors prepared to disperse. The legal annex, thicker than the agreement itself, remained sealed in a secondary file marked confidential. That should have been the end of the meeting. But Harry did not stand. Instead, he remained seated, his hand resting lightly on the table. Witnesses later described a shift in his posture, not hesitation, not uncertainty, but resolve. As officials began collecting documents, he spoke calmly and requested access to the annex file attached to the agreement. The request was unexpected. The room slowed. Princess Anne paused. William's expression hardened slightly, though he said nothing. After a brief exchange among legal officers, the annex was placed before Harry. He flipped through several pages, eyes scanning quickly, jaw tightening almost imperceptibly. Then he closed the file and looked up. What he said next fractured the stillness. "This didn't start with Meghan," he stated, voice controlled but unmistakably firm. "It started when Andrew got involved." For a moment, no one reacted. The words seemed to hover in the chamber, suspended between disbelief and calculation. Princess Anne's face remained composed, but the shift in atmosphere was immediate. William leaned forward. Legal advisors froze mid-motion. Harry did not elaborate. Not yet. But the implication was unmistakable. The custody agreement had just been signed. Authority had just been consolidated. Stability had just been declared. And now, with a single sentence, a new question enters volatile crisis. One no one in that room prepared to confront? Stay tuned. A name that shifted. The narrative. The silence that followed Harry's statement did not fade. It deepened. The custody agreement had just been finalized on February 11, 2026, inside Windsor Castle. Crown-supervised guardianship had been sealed. Relocation authority had been suspended. The institutional machinery had moved swiftly and decisively. And yet, instead of closure, a new fault line had opened. Harry did not raise his voice. He did not dramatize the claim. He simply clarified it. According to him, the chain of events that led to the Emergency Stabilization Agreement did not begin with Meghan's independent decisions in January 2026. It began months earlier, late 2025, when Prince Andrew allegedly initiated private contact with Meghan. Harry stated that Andrew had reached out during a period when tensions inside the Sussex household were already escalating. The communication, he claimed, centered not on family reconciliation, but on positioning, specifically what Andrew allegedly described as sovereign leverage. The phrase hung heavily in the chamber. Harry asserted that Andrew encouraged Meghan to explore international footholds where royal status could carry strategic value without direct institutional oversight. He pointed to Dubai. According to Harry, discussions about potential residency options in the Gulf did not emerge spontaneously in January 2026. They traced back to a private estate dinner in late 2025, one not publicly disclosed at the time. It was during that gathering, Harry claimed, that conversation shifted toward overseas positioning, long-term influence, and maintaining relevance beyond traditional royal structures. He then walked the room through the timeline already documented in earlier filings. October 2025, the controversial luxury skincare photo shoot involving Lilibet in Los Angeles. Harry described it as the first visible escalation, a moment when branding began to edge into territory he believed was unsafe. November 2025, the branded holiday video featuring Archie. Another step forward in what he now characterized as a coordinated expansion. December 2025, the Abu Dhabi gala booking. Flights arranged. Appearances considered. International visibility is prioritized. Individually, each event had raised concerns. Collectively, Harry now framed them as part of a broader strategic arc. He alleged that Andrew encouraged Meghan to use what he called royal ambiguity, the space between title and independence, as a tool for international positioning. According to Harry, the strategy involved subtly distancing him from decision-making authority before institutional intervention could occur. He used two words to describe it: strategic destabilization. The reaction inside the chamber was immediate, though restrained. Princess Anne did not interrupt. She did not challenge him. But witnesses later described her stillness as deliberate, almost evaluative. Prince William leaned forward and asked one direct question. "What evidence do you have?" Harry responded without hesitation. He referenced archived voice notes. He cited what he described as a financial intermediary connection between advisory circles. He mentioned an estate-level contact who, he suggested, could confirm elements of the conversations. He did not produce the materials in that moment, but he insisted they existed. He was careful to clarify one point. This accusation, he said, was not about rewriting the custody agreement that had just been signed. The legal structure now in place would stand. His concern was different. "This isn't only about parenting," he said quietly. "It's about influence." And with that distinction, the crisis shifted from a domestic dispute into something far more complex, an examination not just of decisions, but but of who may have shaped them. But what if this crisis was never personal at all? Who in the shadows was shaping decisions? And why does the gulf suddenly matter? Keep watching. Tracing the Gulf connection. Harry's words about influence did not exist in isolation. They rested on a pattern, one he urged those in the room to examine carefully. If his accusation was to be taken seriously, the timeline had to be reconstructed without emotion, without assumption, and without loyalty clouding judgment. He began with October 2025. That was when the luxury skincare photo shoot involving Lilibet took place in Los Angeles. At the time, it had been dismissed publicly as a branding experiment, a modern extension of celebrity culture. But inside the household, Harry now described it as the first moment he sensed a shift. It was not just a photo session, it was positioning. Then came November 2025. Archie appeared in a branded holiday video distributed by Meghan's media team. The production value was polished. The messaging was subtle but deliberate. Harry had already stated in earlier filings that he had not been informed beforehand. Now, in this chamber, he framed it as the second step in a carefully paced expansion. December 2025 brought something larger. Plans were made for an Abu Dhabi gala appearance. Flights were discussed. International exposure was on the table. For Harry, this was no longer about lifestyle branding. It was about geography. Why the Gulf? Why now? The pattern intensified in January 2026. On January 12th, Meghan signed an intent to withdraw letter from the California Day Preparatory Academy. The reason cited was geostrategic visibility. The wording had unsettled not only Harry, but palace advisors once the document surfaced. Education decisions, once routine, had suddenly been framed in strategic language. By January 28th, a formal school withdrawal form had been signed. And then February 6th, just days before the emergency custodial measures accelerated, a private jet manifest surfaced. The flight was scheduled from Van Nuys to Dubai. The children's names were pre-registered as passengers. Though described as a business-related trip, the timing collided directly with mounting legal tension. It was at this point that Harry connected the thread more explicitly. Prince Andrew, though officially detached from frontline royal duties, had in recent years quietly re-entered private investment conversations, particularly within Gulf-linked financial circles. His historical ties to Middle Eastern donors and advisory networks were well documented. None of it was illegal. None of it was formally tied to custody matters. But the overlap raised questions. Harry alleged that Meghan's negotiations with a Doha-based media fund bore striking similarities to advisory pathways Andrew had once navigated. According to him, there was at least one mutual advisory figure, someone whose name appeared in both networks. He did not claim conspiracy. He did not present official proof, but he suggested alignment. The idea was not that Andrew orchestrated a custody dispute. It was subtler than that. Harry implied that conversations about international repositioning, financial autonomy, and jurisdictional flexibility may have been influenced by someone who understood the mechanics of sovereign gray areas. In the chamber, no one interrupted. The October shoot, the November expansion, the December gala, the January withdrawal letters, the February 6 flight booking, each event could stand alone. Yet laid out in sequence, they formed a directional arc, west to east, domestic to Gulf, routine parenting to strategic mobility. Still, there was no document directly linking Andrew to relocation plans. No signed instruction, no recorded directive placed before the council that morning. Only correlations, only patterns, only suspicion hovering between institutional memory and personal conviction, as the question shifted from what happened to who may have quietly guided it. So who quietly steered the crown's silent shift? And what hidden hand really rewrote Andrew's fate behind closed doors forever. Stay glued. The crown turns inward. If Harry expected an immediate denial or a sharp rebuke, it did not come. After the timeline was laid out, October 2025 through February 6, 2026, and the possible Gulf connections raised, Princess Anne did something far more unsettling than outrage. She said nothing. Her silence was not uncertainty. It was calculation. Within hours of the February 11th, 2026 meeting at Windsor Castle, she initiated a formal internal audit under the authority of the Sovereign Guardianship Advisory Council. The inquiry was sealed. Its scope was narrow but serious, to examine whether any external advisory influence had intersected with the custodial instability that triggered the Windsor Protocol activation. There would be no press statement, no dramatic rebuttal, no public confrontation. Instead, MI5 legal observers, previously consulted during the Joint Custodial Intervention Order proceedings, were quietly reactivated in an advisory capacity. Their role was not criminal investigation, but structural assessment. They were tasked with reviewing cross-border communications, financial alignments, and advisory overlaps connected to the timeline Harry had described. At the same time, a discrete financial review began. Cross-border movements between California, the United Kingdom, Dubai, Doha, and related intermediaries were mapped against publicly known transactions tied to the Archwell structure and affiliated negotiations. The objective was simple: determine whether the Gulf repositioning efforts were isolated business decisions or part of a broader pattern involving legacy networks. Prince William, still operating under temporary sovereign authority granted in December by King Charles, made a decisive move of his own. All public references to Prince Andrew were suspended. Estate functions involving him were quietly reduced. No accusations were announced, no conclusions were drawn. But distance was created. Externally, the monarchy maintained stability. Catherine, Princess of Wales, continued her visible engagement with child welfare initiatives. Her visit to a therapeutic center in Windsor remained framed around community support, not internal turmoil. The optics reinforced continuity, calm guardianship, structured care, emotional reassurance. Inside the custodial framework, Duchess Sophie moved swiftly to consolidate educational oversight. Planning for the Grey House program proceeded without interruption. Psychological evaluations remained scheduled under Royal Pediatric Trust supervision. The children's routines were prioritized above all else. Meanwhile, Lady Louise Windsor's safeguarding report, initially focused on transatlantic custodial stability, expanded in scope. The updated review included a new category: external advisory influence. It did not name individuals. It did not assign blame. But it acknowledged the possibility that decision-making environments can be shaped by voices beyond immediate parents. The shift was subtle, but profound. Until that morning, the monarchy had operated in defense, responding to petitions, relocation attempts, school withdrawal letters, and diplomatic filings. Now, it turned inward. It began asking not only what actions had occurred, but how those actions were influenced. The custody agreement signed on February 11th remained intact. The Windsor Protocol stood firm, but behind the formal structure, a second examination was underway, quieter, deeper, more deliberate. The fortress had not fractured, it had been fortified. And as investigators traced advisory pathways and financial corridors stretching from Montecito to the Gulf, one truth became increasingly clear. This was no longer just a dispute over guardianship. It was a test of institutional awareness, of how influence travels, and of whether subtle guidance can carry consequences as powerful as direct command. And how did whispers from Montecito to the Gulf reshape guardianship into an institutional reckoning globally? Stay with us. Meghan's influence under scrutiny. As the days unfolded, Meghan found herself navigating treacherous waters that seemed to deepen with every passing report. Her team, quick to respond to mounting speculation, issued statements denying any coordination with Andrew, framing him as a figure whose actions were entirely separate from her own. They painted Harry as emotionally vulnerable, prone to impulsive decisions, and positioned the institution itself as steeped in an almost paranoid rigidity that misread every gesture as a threat. Yet despite these efforts, a series of developments slowly chipped away at the carefully constructed defenses. The first blow came from a document long thought dormant. The 2020 custodial clause embedded within Meghan's non-disclosure agreement resurfaced unexpectedly. Legal experts and journalists alike began dissecting the language, debating its implications and potential breaches. At the same time, Project Emancipation, once a shadowy initiative whispered about in investigative circles, suddenly reappeared in leaked materials, its internal strategies and timelines laid bare. These leaks, seemingly minor at first, now appeared coordinated, and observers quickly noted a troubling alignment. Meghan's brand repositioning, carefully framed as a professional pivot, mirrored the timing of her proposed foreign relocation almost too neatly. Public perception, always a volatile currency in high-profile narratives, began to shift with alarming speed. Social media chatter grew increasingly skeptical, commentators scrutinizing not only Meghan's intentions but also the broader networks of influence surrounding her. Polls reflected this change. Support for structured guardianship over the children, previously a secondary concern, climbed steadily, hinting at a populace more attuned to stability and oversight than personal drama. No longer was Meghan's story confined to whispers of privilege or individual missteps. It was becoming a lens through which the public evaluated influence, control, and the unseen webs connecting the powerful. Within this evolving landscape, the narrative subtly but unmistakably transformed. The discourse moved beyond Meghan alone, extending to the intricate networks that shaped, advised, and sometimes manipulated her trajectory. Analysts began mapping these connections, tracing interactions that blurred the lines between personal ambition and institutional leverage. Every press release, every public appearance, and every legal maneuver was scrutinized not only for its immediate impact, but for what it revealed about the larger machinery at work. Even as her camp continued to assert independence and cast doubt on external interpretations, the momentum was no longer theirs to control. Each revelation, each leaked memo, and each shift in public sentiment compounded, creating a pressure that felt increasingly inescapable. Meghan, once positioned as a commanding voice within the narrative, now faced a landscape in which perception and influence were interwoven, and where her personal decisions were inseparable from the strategic networks orbiting her life. The stage was set, the players defined, and the stakes unmistakably high. How did every leak, shifting alliance, and public whisper tighten the pressure until control slipped away? And who truly shaped the narrative? Questions of influence and motive. As Meghan's influence came under intense public scrutiny, another figure quietly emerged into the center of speculation: Prince Andrew. His name carried weight not from recent deeds but from a history that had never fully faded from public memory. Previous controversies, both financial and personal, had left his reputation fragile, a series of cracks that seemed to widen with every passing headline. For months, analysts and journalists debated what role, if any, Andrew might be playing in the unfolding drama surrounding Meghan and Harry. The questions were delicate, unspoken in some circles, yet unavoidable in others. Was he maneuvering quietly, attempting to reclaim relevance through international advisory roles? Or was his presence simply a byproduct of his own complicated legacy, a shadow falling over a family already fractured by tension? Even inside the Windsor estate, the reactions were far from uniform. Some courtiers argued that Andrew's influence was negligible, a distant echo of his former prominence, while others speculated that he might see Meghan's increasingly independent position as leverage, perhaps as a subtle counterweight to Prince William's growing consolidation of power within royal circles. The line between perception and reality blurred, and with Harry visibly unsettled by the media storm, some wondered if the prince's accusations were a projection of his own emotional turmoil rather than an accurate assessment of Andrew's intentions. No formal charges were brought against Andrew, and the palace released no public statement acknowledging any wrongdoing or strategic manipulation. Yet even without official action, the signals were unmistakable to those watching closely. Andrew was quietly excised from 2 private estate functions, moves so subtle that they might have gone unnoticed to the casual observer, but which resonated loudly among insiders. Invitations rescinded, access limited. These were gestures that communicated judgment without ceremony, a silent rebuke that carried its own weight. Meanwhile, speculation extended beyond the palace walls. Journalists scoured financial records, tracing transactions and consulting experts who could interpret the subtleties of advisory arrangements and international dealings. Each detail, seemingly small on its own, contributed to a broader narrative in which influence, control, and familial strategy were inextricably intertwined. Andrew's decisions, whether opportunistic, strategic, or incidental, were scrutinized as part of a larger investigation into how power circulated among the royal family's inner circles. Public discourse mirrored this intrigue. Social media debates flared, contrasting the historical perception of Andrew's missteps with the present circumstances surrounding Meghan and Harry. Opinion polls began to reflect a population increasingly curious about the unseen mechanisms of influence, eager to understand whether family disputes were purely personal or symptomatic of deeper structural tensions. Every new report, leak, or whispered account fed into this growing sense of uncertainty. The question was no longer just about Meghan's independence or Harry's judgment. It had expanded to encompass Andrew's presence, his motives, and the subtle, almost imperceptible ways that historical reputation could affect present-day decisions. For Meghan and Harry, the stakes of Andrew's position were not academic. Decisions about public appearances, private engagements, and strategic alliances were now weighed against the backdrop of his shadow. The delicate balance of perception, influence, and accountability required constant navigation, a careful choreography in which every move could be interpreted multiple ways. While no official statements were issued, the quiet removal of Andrew from key events did not go unnoticed. Insiders read the gesture as a signal. The palace was aware, attentive, and prepared to act when necessary, even if the public remained unaware of the full extent of the considerations at play. In this charged environment, one reality became increasingly clear. The drama surrounding Meghan and Harry had grown far beyond a question of personal misjudgment. The interplay of historical controversies, fragile reputations, and subtle signals of disapproval had transformed the narrative into a complex study of influence and strategy. Andrew's role, whether as opportunist, bystander, or catalyst, cast a shadow over decisions that once seemed straightforward. And with each passing day, the lines between personal conflict and calculated maneuvering grew ever more intricate, leaving both the family and the public to wonder which moves were intentional, which were defensive, and which were simply the echoes of a history that refused to be forgotten. So who's really pulling the strings behind the Sussex storm? And are these moves calculated strategy, desperate defense, or history repeating itself again? Independence and consequences. With the custody arrangement finalized, the children firmly under Crown guardianship protocols, Harry found himself navigating an unfamiliar and precarious position. The agreement, intended to provide structure and security, now framed his world in ways both constraining and revealing. He was no longer fully aligned with Meghan, whose ambitions and strategies had already begun to diverge from his own path. At the same time, he was no longer fully embraced by the institution he had once trusted implicitly. The space between loyalty and estrangement was narrow, yet it offered a kind of freedom he had rarely experienced. For the first time, Harry acted with a measure of independence, weighing choices on his own terms rather than in the shadows of Meghan's influence or royal expectation. This newfound autonomy was both liberating and daunting. Within palace quarters, whispers circulated. Advisors, courtiers, and officials all sensed a subtle shift. The prince, previously guided or constrained by external pressures, now seemed to be carving a path that was uniquely his own. Yet, every move carried consequences. Every word held weight, and every action risked magnifying scrutiny. Privately, Harry faced the most pointed question of all. In a room stripped of public theater, someone asked directly, "Do you stand by your claim?" The question pierced beyond legalities or protocol. It demanded accountability, judgment, and courage. Harry's response was measured, honest, and heavy with implication. "If I'm wrong," he said, "I'll accept the consequences. But if I'm right, this wasn't just about custody." Those words lingered, carrying more than a simple assertion of belief. They framed a larger truth. The situation surrounding Meghan, the children, and the monarchy was not merely about personal disagreements or family arrangements. It was about influence, perception, and the unseen currents that shape decisions at the highest levels. Across Windsor, the reaction was subtle but unmistakable. The fortress of tradition and protocol remained intact, strong and unyielding on the surface. Yet even the most solid structures have points of vulnerability. Advisors recognized that influence, quiet, persistent, and strategic, could seep through the cracks, reshaping outcomes and testing assumptions. The monarchy, accustomed to managing crises with careful deliberation and controlled messaging, now confronted a situation where human agency, public scrutiny, and historical precedent intersected in unpredictable ways. Harry's stance, simultaneously cautious and resolute, sent ripples across these intersecting dynamics. His independence challenged both Meghan's strategies and institutional expectations, signaling a recalibration of influence that had long been assumed to be linear. The prince's willingness to acknowledge responsibility while asserting principle was a rare combination, one that both alarmed and intrigued observers. It highlighted the tension between personal conviction and institutional loyalty, between public perception and private truth. In this charged atmosphere, the internal tremors within the monarchy were unmistakable. No formal upheaval had occurred, no statements, no reversals, no public admissions. Yet the subtle shifts, the quiet recalibrations of trust and attention, suggested that even a fortress as enduring as Windsor could not fully contain the effects of individual agency. Influence, subtle but persistent, was at work, probing gaps, testing assumptions, and reshaping the landscape, one deliberate move at a time. Harry stood at this crossroads, neither fully constrained nor entirely liberated, caught between the weight of history and the possibilities of action. What he chose next would not only define his own trajectory, but also reverberate across the complex network of relationships, expectations, and scrutiny that surrounded him. In a world where appearances often concealed deeper realities, his choices were poised to illuminate the cracks in the system, offering both risk and opportunity in equal measure. So, what do you think? Is Harry forging his own path, or are unseen forces still pulling the strings behind the throne? Share your thoughts in the comments. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.